He really thought I was going to walk out that door. He had no idea the lawyer already knew my name. My name is Valentina Cruz. I'm 31 years old, and I grew up in a mid-sized town in Central Texas, the second of 3 kids, which, in my family, meant I was basically invisible. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way anyone would have noticed from the outside. Just invisible in that quiet, daily sense where the room always seemed to tilt slightly toward everyone else. My mother, Elena, came to the United States from Mexico in her early 20s with almost nothing and built something real from it. She worked double shifts at a hotel laundry for years, folding other people's sheets, breathing in detergent and steam, so that we could have a stable home, a reliable address, a refrigerator that stayed full. She was the kind of woman who made hard things look ordinary because she never complained about them. I learned a lot from watching her. Most of it I didn't understand until it was too late to tell her. My father left when I was 9. I don't have much to say about that, except that it left a vacuum, and my older brother Derek, 5 years older than me, and fully aware of it, stepped right in to fill it. He was 16 when Dad left, old enough to feel important, old enough to enjoy being leaned on. He became the man of the house in a way that, over time, stopped being generous and started being something else. Something that looked like leadership from a distance, but felt like control up close. I wasn't the loud one. I wasn't the one who made scenes or demanded things. I graduated from community college, worked my way into a bookkeeping position at a small construction firm, and for years I quietly sent money home when my mom's hours got cut. Never mentioned it at family dinners, never brought it up when credit was being handed out. It just needed doing, so I did it. That was the logic I lived by for most of my 20s. I also want to tell you about my younger sister, Priya. She's my half-sister, technically, from a brief relationship my mother had a few years after my father left. Priya is sweet, genuinely sweet, but she's always been the kind of person who reads the room and follows the strongest current in it. And for most of our lives, that current was Derek. Derek had the title. He was in every birthday photo, every holiday pew, every family story told at dinner. But he was the prize child in every room he walked into, the one they always praised, the one they held up. I was just the one who paid the electric bill when nobody was looking. In my mother's final months, she had a chronic heart condition that had been worsening for 2 years. I drove 2 hours each way, every other weekend, to sit with her. I cooked for her. I made her a medication chart in a Google spreadsheet with color-coded columns because she kept mixing up her afternoon pills. I stayed on the phone with her some nights until I could hear her breathing slow into sleep. Derek showed up for the big moments, the hospital visits that made for good social media photos, the moments that looked like devotion from the outside. And somehow, the way these things always seem to go, he got the credit for all of it. Ma, I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because what happened at that funeral and what came after changed everything I thought I knew about my family. And I need you to understand who I was before it did. If you've ever been the one in the background, the one doing the real work while someone else took the applause, you already know exactly how this feels. You know that specific exhaustion that isn't really about being tired. It's about being unseen in a room full of people who are supposed to know you. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments, have you ever done something big for someone you love and never once got a thank you? Because I think more of us have lived this than we talk about. I think it's one of those things we carry quietly and assume is just the shape of our particular life. But if this is the kind of story that hits close to home, make sure you're subscribed, because I'm just getting started and it only gets more unbelievable from here. And if you're already feeling this, go ahead and click like right now. Let's keep going. 2 weeks before the funeral, my mother took a serious turn. I got the call at 6:47 in the morning on a Tuesday. I remember the time because I was already awake, already sitting at my kitchen table with coffee I hadn't touched, and the sound of the phone in that quiet made my whole body understand before my mind did. I drove up immediately. I missed 2 days of work without pay and didn't think twice about it. When I arrived at the hospital, Derek was already there. He was standing in the hallway outside my mother's room. Halfway through a phone call about a used truck he was trying to sell. He didn't look up when I walked in. I stood there for a moment, coat still on, key still in my hand, watching him gesture and talk, and I thought, this is the man they've been praising all these years. In my mother's final lucid days, we had a quiet conversation that I've turned over in my mind every day since. She took my hand. Her grip was weaker than I'd ever felt it, and she looked at me with complete clarity. "I fixed it, mija," she said. "I made sure it was right this time. Don't let them rush you out of anything." I assumed she was talking about the hospital paperwork, some forms she'd been anxious about. I told her not to worry. I told her I'd handle whatever needed handling. She passed 4 days later. I handled the death certificate coordination. I called the funeral home. I contacted the church and organized the reception. I made the calls nobody wants to make, in the order they needed to be made, without anyone asking me to. Derek, meanwhile, positioned himself as the one holding the family together. He posted on social media a photo of himself at her bedside during that 1 hour he visited, with a caption about strength and loss that got over 200 comments. I read it in a parking lot and sat there for a while. The eulogy he gave at the funeral was something I can only describe as a speech that was technically about my mother, but was mostly about him. He cried at the right moments. The aunts held his arm. Priya sat beside him in the front pew. I sat 1 row back, alone. And I felt there with my hands folded, and I listened to him talk about a woman he had helped himself to all his life, and I did not make a sound. The reception was held at my mother's house, the house she had built, the house she had sacrificed for. Derek moved through the rooms like he already owned them. I would find out later that he had already made contact with a real estate agent. He had already had a conversation about what the house could list for. My mother had been dead for approximately 72 hours. That's when it happened, the scene I opened with. Derek found me near the hallway, while 2 aunts stood within easy earshot. His voice was low, but deliberate. He wanted them to hear, "You don't need to stay for the reading, Val. It's family. Close family. Mom left things to people who were actually there for her." The blood left my face. I looked at the aunts. One looked away. The other gave a small, almost apologetic shrug. The shrug of someone who knows something is wrong and has decided not to spend themselves on it. I asked him, very quietly, "Did she tell you that?" His answer, "She didn't have to." He walked back into the living room. 30 seconds later, I heard him laugh at something someone said. I sat in my car for 11 minutes. I did not leave. I did not cry. But something hardened in my chest that afternoon, something that felt permanent and turned out to be. 3 days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A man introduced himself as Gerald Okafor, my mother's attorney. He said, "Ms. Cruz, I'm calling because you're listed as the primary beneficiary in your mother's estate. I'd like to schedule a time to go over the details." I asked him to repeat it twice. I didn't call Derek that night. I sat alone in my apartment with the information, turning it over, and for the first time in years, I cried. But not from pain, from something I hadn't felt in a long time and almost didn't recognize, something that felt underneath everything, like being held. My mother had known exactly what she was doing. She had been planning this quietly, while the rest of us were too busy playing our roles to notice. 2 days after the funeral, I noticed I'd been removed from the family group chat, the one that had existed for 6 years. Holiday plans, birthday reminders, the general noise of a family pretending to be close. Gone. No explanation. No warning. I texted Priya directly. 40 minutes later, she replied, "Derek said it was just easier to keep it to immediate family for now. While we figure out the estate stuff, it's not personal." I didn't respond. I took a screenshot and saved it. I wasn't sure why yet. It just felt like something I should keep. Within a week, I heard through an aunt that Derek had been telling relatives that Elena's final months were really hard on him because he was basically doing it alone. The story had already been rewritten. The twice-monthly drives were gone from the narrative. The medication spreadsheet, the late-night phone calls, the meals I cooked and froze, so she'd have something easy during the week. None of it existed in his version. And here's the thing about that. It's one thing to not get credit. It's another thing entirely when someone takes the story of what you did and hands it to themselves. That particular cruelty has its own specific weight. It sits in a different part of your chest than ordinary unfairness. 8 days after the funeral, Derek called a family meeting at the house to discuss next steps. I found out about it from my Aunt Rosa, who assumed I'd already been told. I drove up anyway, unannounced. I arrived to find Derek, Priya, 2 aunts, and a man I didn't recognize sitting at my mother's kitchen table. Printed documents were spread out in front of them. The smell in that kitchen, coffee and something faintly like her hand lotion, almost undid me right there in the doorway. Derek's face when he saw me was not guilty. It was annoyed. "Val, this isn't really the right time." I sat down. Then I'll wait until it is." The man with the documents was a real estate agent. Derek had already initiated a formal conversation about listing the house. He presented it to the aunts as just exploring options, as what Mom would have wanted, as being practical. Nobody at the table mentioned that the house might not be Derek's to list. I said nothing during the meeting. I watched. I learned. On the drive home, I called Gerald Okafor and left a voicemail asking to move up our appointment. 2 weeks after the funeral, the extended family held a second gathering, an informal repast dinner at an aunt's house, a remembrance, a coming together. I came. I brought my mother's rice pudding, the one she made every Christmas, the one I'd learned by standing beside her in this exact kitchen for 20 years. But Derek was 3 drinks in by the time I arrived. When I set the dish on the table, he looked over and said, in front of 7 relatives, in a voice that carried, "Oh, Val's here, making herself at home like always. I'm surprised you even knew the recipe. You were never around enough to learn it." A couple of cousins who didn't know better laughed. The ones who did know better went quiet. My Aunt Rosa started to say something. Derek talked right over her. I picked up a paper plate. I served myself a small portion of my own dish. I sat at the far end of the table and ate slowly. I did not leave early. I stayed until the dishes were being wrapped up and helped clean. Later, in my car, I called my closest friend and said, "He did it in front of everyone. He wants me to disappear." He's been practicing for this for 30 years. She said, "Val, you need to stop waiting for permission to fight back." That line didn't leave me. The thing about that stretch of weeks was that the grief wasn't simple. I was mourning my mother, her voice, her hands, the specific way she said my name, and simultaneously watching her memory get repackaged by someone who had always served himself first. The exhaustion of that is hard to explain. It's not just sadness, it's a layered thing. Sadness stacked on top of sadness, with something hot underneath it. But underneath the exhaustion, something else was growing. A quiet stillness. The kind that people who underestimate you always mistake for weakness. Here's what nobody at that table knew. What Derek didn't know. What even Priya didn't know. In the final months of Elena's life, during my visits, my mother had quietly asked me to help her organize her personal files. A shoebox of papers, a locked drawer, an old accordion folder she kept on the high shelf of her closet. She called it getting her affairs in order. I assumed it was what people do at the end. The practical tidying, the paperwork that keeps existing even when the person doesn't. But as I sorted through it, I noticed things I hadn't understood at the time. A handwritten letter from Elena to her attorney, dated 14 months before her death, a copy of a revised will with a date stamp I hadn't seen before, and a folder of printed bank statements, with certain transactions circled in red pen, her handwriting, her circles. I hadn't understood the circled transactions when I first saw them, but after the family meeting with the real estate agent, and I pulled that folder out again and looked more carefully. Over a period of 18 months, a series of withdrawals from Elena's personal savings account, amounts ranging from $400 to $1,200, all transferred to an external account. Not mine, not the household bills, not Priya's, Derek's. Elena had known. She had documented it quietly, without confrontation, the way women of her generation sometimes handled things, not out of passivity, out of strategy. She had been building a record. I sat at my kitchen table at 11:30 at night with a highlighter in my hand, and I understood. My mother wasn't just leaving me the house. She was leaving me the proof. She trusted me to know what to do with it. I didn't call Derek. I didn't call Priya. And I called Gerald Okafor first thing the next morning and asked if I could bring documents to our meeting. I didn't have a full plan yet, but I had something better than anger. I had evidence, and I had a mother who loved me quietly enough to make sure I was protected even after she was gone. They thought the story was over. It was just getting to the part that mattered. Gerald Okafor's office was on the second floor above a tax preparation storefront downtown. Small, a little worn, the kind of space that smells like old paper and wood polish and serious decisions. He was in his late 60s, unhurried, with reading glasses he took on and off while he talked. He had been Elena's estate attorney for over 20 years, originally appointed by my grandmother and carried forward through every document my mother ever signed. But he knew her history. He had watched her build what she built. He laid it out plainly. And I'll tell you, it was the most honest 15 minutes anyone in a professional setting had ever given me. Elena's revised will, finalized 11 months before her death, named me as the sole primary beneficiary of the estate, the house, a modest life insurance payout, and the remaining savings account balance. Priya received a meaningful bequest, Elena's jewelry collection, and a handwritten letter. Derek received one thing, their grandfather's watch, designated personally by Elena. Gerald had already sent a formal legal notice to Derek 10 days prior, as required. I asked, does he know what's in it? Gerald, he knows he received a notice. Well, whether he's accepted what that means, that I can't tell you. I slid the folder of bank statements across the desk. Gerald put his glasses on. He went quiet for a moment, a careful, reading kind of quiet. Then, your mother brought these to me as well. She was thorough. I want you to know, none of what happened to that account happened without her awareness. He explained it clearly. Elena had already flagged the withdrawals with him. She had not filed a formal complaint, not because she was afraid, but because she'd decided her will was the appropriate response. Gerald told me gently. She said, I don't want to fight while I'm alive, but I want it settled when I'm gone. I cried in his office, not dramatically, just quietly looking at the desk while he waited without rushing me. And then he said, you're going to need to be prepared for pushback. He may contest. It's unlikely to succeed given the documentation, but it will be uncomfortable. I nodded. I've been uncomfortable my whole life. I know how to sit in it. The family tension escalated fast after that. Derek had received the legal notice, and for the first time in weeks, he called me directly, not to apologize, but to negotiate. His voicemail was controlled, but the edge in his voice was unmistakable. Val, I think we need to have a conversation about Mom's intentions. I don't think this document reflects what she actually wanted. Call me back. He called Priya too, and Priya, caught and confused between the two of us, texted me. Derek says the will is wrong and that Mom was confused at the end. Is that true? I took my time before I responded. Then, Priya. Mom was not confused. She was the clearest she'd ever been. Call Gerald Okafor if you want to understand what she actually wanted. His number is in the paperwork. Priya went quiet for 3 days. Unable to reach me, Derek began working the extended family, calling relatives, reframing what was happening as me having manipulated Elena in her final months, taking advantage of a sick woman who didn't know what she was signing. It was a specific kind of lie, the kind that sounds almost reasonable if you don't know better. Then, Aunt Rosa called me. He's telling everyone you tricked her, she said. I told him that was a lie, and he hung up on me. I just want you to know, I know what you did for her. I was there. The formal probate proceedings were now in motion. The tension coiled tighter every day, but I had my documents. And I had my composure, and I had a lawyer who had known my mother for 2 decades and understood exactly what she had intended. The probate hearing was scheduled 6 weeks after Elena's death. Gerald had prepared me thoroughly. Derek had retained his own attorney, a younger man named Craig, who, Gerald told me with professional neutrality, files a lot of nuisance motions. In the days before the hearing, Derek made one final attempt to settle outside of court. Not out of generosity. Craig had quietly told him the contest was weak. Derek texted me directly this time. The message was long. It opened with a paragraph about how much he loved our mother. It ended with a proposal: split the house 50-50, drop the matter of the bank statements, move forward as a family. I read it twice. I waited until the next morning. And then I replied with 4 words: see you in court. The courthouse room was not dramatic the way courtrooms look in films. It was beige. It had fluorescent lighting that hummed faintly. The judge had clearly seen 100 versions of this exact family in this exact situation. But for me, sitting at a table across an aisle from my brother, with something formal and legal between us for the first time, it was the most important room I had ever been in. Derek's attorney opened with the expected argument. Valentina Cruz had been in cognitive decline. The will was executed under undue influence. Valentina Cruz had disproportionate access to Elena in her final months. He used the phrase, isolated the deceased from her primary family support. He meant Derek. I watched Derek while Craig talked. He was in a button-down shirt. He hands folded on the table, performing quiet dignity. He was very good at performance. He had been practicing his whole life. Gerald responded methodically. He entered into the record Elena's written communications with him over a 14-month period, showing consistent, lucid decision-making. A letter Elena had written in her own handwriting, dated 8 months before her death, explicitly stating her reasons for revising the will and naming me. Documentation from Elena's physician confirming she retained full cognitive capacity until her final 2 weeks. And the bank statement folder, not as a formal fraud claim, but as context. Evidence of a pattern that had directly informed my mother's choices. Craig objected. The judge overruled. Then Gerald did something I hadn't expected. He called me to speak briefly, and I hadn't prepared anything. I sat in the witness area, and the judge asked me a few direct questions. Was I present during the drafting of the will? No. Was I aware of the will's contents before Elena's death? No. Did Elena ever indicate she intended to leave me the estate? I paused. Then, she told me she'd fixed it, that she made sure things were right. I thought she meant paperwork. I didn't know what she meant until I got the call from Mr. Okafor. I looked at the judge, not at Derek. My mother worked 60-hour weeks for 30 years. She made her own decisions. She made this one. Silence in the room, the particular silence of a space where something true has just been said out loud. The judge didn't take long. The will was validated. The estate transferred as written. Derek's contest was denied. Craig gathered his papers quickly. It's the way people do when they want to look like they have somewhere else to be. Then came the moment I return to again and again when I tell this story. Derek stood up, and for a brief, unguarded second, the performance dropped. I saw it. Not rage, not grief, just the specific, hollow look of a person who has been certain of something their entire life and has just discovered the foundation was never real. He didn't say anything to me in the room. He walked out. In the hallway, before he was even through the door, I could hear him on his phone. It's done. It went the way I told you it might. Yeah, I know. He sounded tired. He sounded like someone who had already begun rewriting the story again, because that was the only thing he knew how to do. Priya had come to the hearing. She hadn't sat beside Derek. She sat in the gallery. 3 rows back, and I had noticed without looking directly at her. On the courthouse steps afterward, she found me. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. She really wasn't confused, Priya said. Almost a question. Not quite. No, I said. She was the most certain she'd ever been. Priya nodded slowly. She didn't apologize, but she reached out and squeezed my hand, once, and I, who had been holding myself together with careful, exhausted composure for 6 weeks, let myself feel it. We stood on the steps for a minute without talking. Then she said, "She left me her earrings, the gold ones she wore to every Christmas." "She loved you," I said. "She loved us both. She just knew which one of us needed protecting." Gerald came out behind us, gave me a brief, warm nod. Professional. We'll begin the transfer process this week. Call me if anything comes up. I watched him go, and then I stood there a moment longer, in front of a courthouse in a town where I grew up invisible, holding the legal reality that my mother had seen me clearly all along, and made sure the world eventually would too. The weeks after the hearing were quieter than I expected. Derek didn't reach out. No more group chat maneuvering, no more voicemails performing reasonableness. The silence from him was total. And I realized, with some genuine surprise, that it was easier to breathe without the constant low hum of his opinion filling every room. The house transferred to me through the formal process, and the first thing I did when I held the keys was go to my mother's kitchen, the small table by the window where she drank her coffee every morning, and sit there alone for a long time, doing nothing at all, just sitting in the room where she had lived, letting it be hers and mine at the same time. I haven't decided yet whether I'll sell. I'm still working through what I want and what I want it to mean, but that decision is mine to make, in my own time. And there is something enormous in that, something I hadn't fully anticipated, the weight of finally being the one who gets to choose. Priya and I began a slow, careful repair. It isn't instant. There's too much between us, too many moments where she looked away when she should have spoken up. But 3 weeks after the hearing, we talked on the phone on a Sunday for almost 2 hours. By the end, something had shifted. We agreed to be more honest with each other than we'd been comfortable being before. It's not a resolution. It's a beginning. Derek, I've heard through Aunt Rosa, is still telling his version, still painting himself as the victim of a legal technicality, a manipulated system, a daughter who swooped in at the end. Some relatives believe him. Some don't. I stopped tracking which is which. It's not a scoreboard I can afford to keep. Aunt Rosa became a steadier presence in my life after all of it. She calls to check in. She stops by the house when I'm there on weekends. One afternoon, she said, quietly, not making a ceremony of it, "Your mama talked about you more than you know. She was proud of you in a way she didn't always know how to say out loud." I carry that. I carry it every day. The honest truth about what healing looks like is this. I didn't walk out of that courthouse fixed. I walked out tired and sad, and still grieving. Winning something legal doesn't bring your mother back. It doesn't undo 30 years of being the one they forgot to invite. But it does something else. It confirms that what you knew about yourself was real, that you weren't imagining it, that one person at least saw you clearly, and she used every quiet tool she had to make sure it was on record. My mother couldn't be at that hearing, but she was the one who won it. I just showed up. If you've ever been the one excluded from a family group chat you helped build, if you've ever done the hard, invisible work and watched someone else take the bow, this story was for you. You already know this isn't just about a will. It's about whether the people who were supposed to see you ever actually did. That's the real thing. That's what sits with you at 2 a.m. Not the money. Not the house. The question of whether it mattered that you were there. I want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. Have you ever had a moment where someone finally saw what you'd been doing all along? Or are you still waiting for it? Both answers belong here. There's no wrong version of this. Family stuff is complicated. We love people who hurt us. We stay in rooms where we're undervalued because leaving feels like losing something we were never really given. That's real. You don't have to have it figured out to talk about it. You don't have to be past it to name it. If this story reached something in you, click like to help it reach others who need it. You might be the reason someone feels less alone today. Before you go, I want to say something that has nothing to do with wills or courtrooms. If you're in the middle of your own version of this story right now, if you're still in the part where nobody believes you, where you're sitting in your car wondering if you're overreacting, you're not. You know what you've done. You know what you've given. And you're not crazy for wanting it to matter. If you're new here, subscribe, because this channel is for people who've been underestimated. Every story we tell is about someone who kept going when they had every reason to stop. And I think you're going to want to be here for what comes next, Next time, a story about a woman who let her family believe she had nothing. She showed up to a dinner with a secret that changed every seat at the table. You do not want to miss it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself, and remember, being overlooked is not the same as being without power. Sometimes the quietest person in the room has already won. They just haven't told you yet.